through our study of the Quran. And welcome again for another session in Always Receiving Nur, with Always Receiving Nur. We are continuing to journey in Surah 31, Surah Luqman. And Dr. Yamina is kindly leading us in the study. And as most of you know, this is meant to be a session where you're welcome to join in with your thoughtful comments and as well as questions. We'll also have a more formal Q&A at the end. You're welcome to keep your questions till the end, or you're welcome to also raise them as Sister Yamina goes and discourses. So without further delay, I'll turn to Sister Yamina to lead us tonight. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Isra. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم افتح لنا أبواب حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. So welcome back to our fourth week on Surat Luqman, which is the 31st chapter of the Quran. So during the last 3 weeks, we reflected on the first 5 verses of this chapter. And it was mainly about describing the muhsins to us. And now in Ayah 6, in the 6th verse, we encounter a new category of people, or a new way of being in the world. And of course we said all these are not really categories of people, but really different characteristics that all of us can acquire or leave. Inshallah, we'll acquire the good ones and leave the unwanted ones. So it's really you see the rahmah in the exposition of the Quran. It's showing us all these ahwal, these ways of being in the world that are all contained, that are all within ourselves, but we're not always aware of them. And now we can see them clearly reflected to us in the Quran, so we can pause and reflect and think and contemplate and make our choices and decisions. Inshallah, may those choices be in the right path, inshallah. So this 6th ayah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ وَيَتَّخِذَهَا هُزُوًا أُولَئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. And there are people who purchase baseless idle talk, idle stories, to mislead from the path of God without knowledge, and they ridicule it, meaning the path. Those will have a humiliating retribution.
Sister Yamina, I can't hear you. Is it just me?
No, it was Zoom was cut off and
I see. Okay.
Came back again. So after the description of the muhsinin, the prosperous ones who follow the Lord's guidance, now comes the description of the people who are doomed to a humiliating retribution. Those mindless people who purchase baseless idle stories to mislead from the path of God without any knowledge. And not only they do that, but also they ridicule it. So here, hadith, lahwa al-hadith, in the Quran, hadith, depending on the context, may refer to statement or talk or stories, like when it's هل أتاك حديث موسى, هل أتاك حديث الغاشية. There it is the story, the news of Musa, for instance. And when it's talking about God, then it is the statement, وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ حَدِيثًا, for instance. And just like here, we told that these people purchase lahwa al-hadith. In another place in the Quran, there is mention of ahsan al-hadith, the most goodly, the most beautiful talk, story. And that is the divine address itself. It says, Allah nazzala ahsan al-hadithi kitaban mutashabihan mathaniya. So the ahsan al-hadith is the revelation itself, it's the Quran itself. It is God's address to humanity, to us. That's the most beautiful hadith, the most beautiful talk statement. So what these people are doing really, they are purchasing baseless, idle talk at the expense of the most beautiful, the best talk, the best statement, the best message, let's say. And lahwa here refers to anything that is distracting, anything that diverts. And in this case, anything that diverts us from the wisdom in the divine message, since here the emphasis from the beginning was on wisdom, which we know is the best thing that could happen to any one of us. وَمَنْ أُوتِيَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, as we are told in the Quran. So while the muhsins gain wisdom from the divine revelation, from ahsan al-hadith, from the best of talks, the doomed ones here, not only they leave this wise book, that in itself is a great loss, because they leave this wise message and therefore they do not benefit from it. But on top of that, in their ignorance, without any knowledge, they purchase, meaning not necessarily that they are giving money, but it is a transaction which indicates choice. They choose idle stories with no benefits to them over valuable wisdom. And that's the opposite of wisdom. That is foolishness. And this choice, we are told, is not based on some kind of knowledge. It's not like they know something and that's why they are making this choice. Not at all. They just follow their whims. Here there are lots of very important and pragmatic hints for us. If we remember the questions that were asked in the very beginning, how do we surrender? How do we become a muhsin? In all this, there are hints given to us. We'll come back to those, inshallah, later. So,
can I ask just a quick question here? When it says they purchase, you highlighted that it doesn't have to be, purchasing with money, and it's actually a choice. Is there also an emphasis because it uses the word to purchase? Is there also a highlight of the fact that not only we are getting what doesn't really benefit us, but something that actually turns us from the way, but also like we are actually giving something precious to get something harmful like that. So like we're maybe giving up our time, we may be giving up our also wealth, or we may be giving up something precious to get something in return that's actually harmful. Could that be in that term yashtari?
Yeah, I mean, whenever the transaction itself is a buying and selling transaction, because whenever we leave the message and the wisdom of the Quran and we are busy with anything else, what we're doing is actually, we can say we are spending our time, and our time is really our life. It's our capital. Money is part of it. It's a very tiny part of it, because how do we make money? Again, using that capital. And so when we are doing that, not only we are wasting that capital, but we're wasting it manyfold, because we could be using it in the best way, which is following the wisdom and the guidance of the Quran. Manyfold, because when we follow the wisdom of the Quran, it looks to the hereafter. I'll emphasize that more again, inshallah. So not only there is a great loss, the loss of this life and the next one, and at the same time we're getting in return something very futile, something very without, not only without value because it's perishable, and but also even when if it's not harmful, it's harmful because it's undermining our eternal life, but it doesn't have any benefit on top of that. It doesn't have any even a passing benefit when you really look at it. And that's why it is utter foolishness. It's just the opposite of wisdom. In the Quran, very often we are presented with totally opposite situations, so that we can contrast, see through the contrast we can understand things better. And here also, when we go from the topic of the muhsinin to the topic of these people those people, alhamdulillah, so they're far away, inshallah. It's easier to see something from far, although all these characteristics are in all of us, either potentially or we actually practice it. But it's easier to see something from far. So here we're actually presented with something, the description of the opposite of the muhsin, actually. So the purchase is, yeah, it's a transaction. We're selling something, selling our life, selling our eternal life for something that has no value. And it is a choice, because when we purchase, it's not like it's just happening to us. And as we always emphasize, it's the fact that we don't make the right choice consciously does not absolve us from responsibility. And we know from this ayah, it's telling us that this choice is not based on knowledge. It's just these people follow their whims, as we are told in many times again and again in the Quran, like in إن كثيرا ليضلون بأهواههم بغير علم. So we know in another part of the Quran it says, many people lead others astray by their own whims, by their following their own views without having any knowledge. So these people, or those people, as it says here, they leave the best source of wisdom. They leave the Quran, the best source of wisdom. And instead, they choose to follow idle talk and stories and belief and views and whatever. And they don't stop there. Third, they make others deviate from the path of God, although they have no knowledge. And four, on top of that, they ridicule the path of God, the path to wisdom and prosperity, as though they knew something, where in fact they are only following their own whims. SubhanAllah, it may seem like it has nothing to do with us, but actually this lahu al-hadith, which often is interpreted as referring to entertainment, actually could refer to any field of life, anything in life, anything that distracts us from God, anything that leads us to forget about our purpose in life and leads us therefore to shirk, or to a shirky way of being in the world. And for instance, science, we could be going and paying to get knowledge, and the so-called knowledge that we get, for instance, science is only one of them. Entertainment is included like any other field. It depends on how we perceive it, what we do with it, how we interact with that entertainment, that science, that knowledge. Is it bringing us closer to God or away from the path of God? That's what matters. For instance, in science, especially with in the last centuries, it's been used often to mislead people from the path of God, the path of wisdom, claiming that everything happens naturally, that it explains existence without needing any divinity. And therefore claiming to be an alternative worldview to religion, to any religion actually, to the sacred. And it is claimed to be based on knowledge, but that knowledge is often erroneous and harmful, and it brings no benefit to humanity. And often it is harmful in this life and in the next, or at least it doesn't benefit us neither in this life nor in the next. And I wanted to particularly bring that, for instance, science, because it's always like entertainment, music, singing. But like if someone is listening to music, he's more likely to make istighfar and come back. But if someone thinks that he learned something, this is a scientific theory, he may not even be aware that he is looking at the creation in a non-Quranic way, in a shirky way, and not being even aware of it. He doesn't see, we can learn to look at the world in a way that we don't see the face of God, we don't seek the face of God in anything in our life. And so we cannot find the path to ihsan, because the path to ihsan is the path of those who seek the face of God in everything, those who have certainty of the life to come. And how can they have certainty in the life to come if they have not observed it and witnessed it here and now in this world, in this life?
Sister Amina, just as a clarification, comment / question, when you said science can be an example of this idle talk, and it doesn't have any benefit, it actually has harm. It can. You're meaning science in the sense of those stories told to us is in competition with Tawheed, the Quranic view. So the notion that we don't need God anymore, and we explaining things just by referring to nature, and we don't need anything beyond nature to understand this world. All of these claims that are passed off in the name of science, or oftentimes presented as science, this is the harmful talk. Because otherwise somebody can say, well, it has some benefits, science has benefits, we have technology, but that's not the science that you're talking about. The science you're talking about is that materialistic interpretation of the world,
Yes.
that pretension that we don't need to refer to God, or even actually, God may be there, but he's not relevant. We understand the world without anything beyond this world. That claim itself is harmful and it has no benefit. Somebody can do all kinds of research and develop all kinds of technology without at all needing that kind of materialistic attitude.
Yes, that's true. Thank you. And actually, if someone really is a muhsin and, as you said, like a scientist, or like the invention of the muhsin will be something that will truly be invented with the intention to help humanity, rather than lots of the technology we have could be helping in some ways, but at the same time it is all designed also to exploit the people, not to serve them. So it's not about one thing like entertainment or music being in itself good and bad. It is how we approach it and whose fruit it is, whose mentality, whose intention, what kind of intention. Is it an intention to benefit and serve, or the intention to exploit and make money, for instance, from people? And that all comes back to the intention of the person who is either a muhsin who has surrendered to God and follows his guidance, or someone who is following his own whims. If I'm following my own whims, if I want to do whatever I want, why should I start doing? So there are two. It could look at the interpretation, as you said, an interpretation, for instance, when we explain how it rains to our children, if we are giving the scientific explanation, we don't need God there. But when you read the Quran, it says, we are the ones, God, we being the divine, we the royal divine we are the ones who send the clouds, who do this and that. But we give an explanation where there is no room for any divine action in it. So there is the interpretation, and there is what we do with, whether you call it technology or, but this is not only for science, this is for everything in our life. Everything in our life, even the created nature, it's a created world. It is created with the purpose of reminding us of God. It is created as sign, as ayat, bearing messages from their maker and creator. But I can interact with it as something that will be an obstacle for me, that makes me forget about God rather than remember him. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's not only entertainment, it's everything in our life. And it's also, the key is in my intention, and therefore my perception, my intention of how to interact with the world. Because if someone is a muhsin, even with an interpretation that denies, that doesn't give any room for the divine, will make him stop and pause and realize that something is wrong here, and will be an opportunity for him to revise that interpretation and find God's activity and Rububiyyah activity in places where he was not aware of before. So it's really, really, what we make of it. Is it okay? Can we move?
Yes, thank you.
There is a in the Quran in Surah Al-Hadid, and it starts with اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو. Know that the life of this world is only plain idle talk, and it ends with وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع الغرور. And the life of the world of this world is but the enjoyment of self-delusion. So for the muhsin, this life is the mirror to the face of God and to his beautiful names. And to the heedless, to the ghafil, to the mindless, it is exactly the opposite. It's the same life. But it becomes for the heedless, who is heedless of the face of God, who is heedless of that aspect of life, of creation that looks to its maker. For that person, this life is play and idle talk, and it is self-delusion. Does it make sense? How is it so? Like, you can say, like, isn't it the same world, the same life? Yes, but the world, as we keep repeating, has an impermanent aspect. And that impermanent aspect, that past aspect that keeps, that's perishable, is itself the mirror reflecting the permanent aspect. It is because everything alive dies, changes, and dies ultimately that they point and reflect the source of permanent life. They are as though glorifying God and reminding us and telling us that He alone is the giver of life, that life does not belong to them. It is not from them that they are given life and given death, and it is through their life and death they speak and reflect the enduring life of the living one. So the impermanent aspect of creation, of life, of the world, is the mirror reflecting the permanent aspect that looks to God and to his enduring qualities. This is something that we reflected a lot, especially during our monthly teleconferences. So the muhsin is the one who intentionally knows and seeks the face of his Rabb. The muhsins, they seek the face of their Rabb in everything. And that's why they seek, because that's their intention and that's what they look for. And they long for the face of their Rabb. They find it, they see it in everything. And the heedless, who is unaware of the face of his Rabb, unaware of who he is, just living haphazardly, they seek the satisfaction of their own whims and desires and impulses and wants. And so they only interact with the world's impermanent aspect. And they live in self-delusion, because that's not the reality of the world, that's not the reality of who they are.
Dr. Yamina, I had one question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry I can't raise my hand in this iPad. The thing is that you just mentioned about the hadith, Surah Hadith, in which Lahu came with Laibun, right? Laibun. So usually they come together. Sometimes Lahu is first and then Laibun is first. But
Yes.
here it is only Lahu. So I wanted to find out the difference. This is unusual because...
But here it's lahw al-hadith. It is idle talk. It's not used in the same way here. Well, it's in the same way as it is distracting and it's idle. There it says the al-hayat al-dunya, the life of this world is only play and idle talk. But these here, yeah, it is true that lahu is often comes together with la'ib, but it's a slightly different context. It is related. That's why I gave the example of this area.
Thank you, Jazakallah.
So you can see how far those people are from ihsan. Just the muhsinun we have seen earlier, they embody ihsan, they radiate ihsan. The ihsan, the beauty and the goodness of living in the presence of God, and seeking his face in everything, and as a result they reflect his face, they reflect his divine attributes in their life. And that means they reflect it in their relationship with their Rabb. They live Bismillah in the name of their Rabb, not in their name. When they do goodness, they don't claim to be good themselves, but this is a goodness from our Rabb. This is a blessing. This is a grace. And because of this, their relationship with their own selves is also beautiful. They know who they are. They know that they are ibad, that they are the servants of their Lord, the guests of the hosts. And it also reflects on how they interact with other people. They interact with other people also with ihsan in a beautiful way. And that is why even people who don't know God can recognize them as muhsin. If you remember in Surah Yusuf, when Yusuf alayhi salam was in prison with his two companions, when they had dreams and they asked him for the interpretation of their dreams, they said to him, "For we see that you are a muhsin. نبئنا بتأويله إنا نراك من المحسنين." And we know that they don't know about God, they don't know about the hereafter, because Yusuf alayhi salam, before he tells them the interpretation of the dreams, he first tells them about God and the hereafter. So the muhsin, that ihsan shows up at all levels, and it shows up in the person's social life, in the person's interaction with other people. So these people could see how beautifully he interacted. He how do you say, before you say, how beautiful he was, like his being was beautiful and his interaction with them was beautiful. And the doomed people in verse 6 are the opposite of the muhsin. They not only harm themselves by not following the wisdom of the Quran, therefore they lose the benefit of that wisdom in this life and in the next life, but they also harm themselves and harm others. So we're told they don't only follow idle talk, but they also want to distract other people as well. And we know that in other parts of the Quran, it's repeated that these people who want to mislead others. And that's why there is a huge difference between these two, between the muhsins and this kind of people, as we are told in another ayah, أَفَمَنْ كَانَ عَلَى بَيِّنَةٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ كَمَنْ زُيِّنَ لَهُ سُوءُ عَمَلِهِ وَاتَّبَعُوا أَهْوَاءَهُمْ. So these idle talk, remember what makes something idle and distracting from the divine path, from ليضل عن سبيل الله, is the perception of the person. Because we could be looking at the same thing and it is idle, it is distracting for one and not distracting for the other one. Why? Because one person is a muhsin and seeking the face of God in everything, and the other one is someone who follows his own whims, as it says here, is he who relies on a clear evidence, على بينة, from his Lord, min Rabbihi, like those for whom the evil of their doings seem goodly, and such as follow their own whims. So those who are not on a clear guidance, on a clear evidence from their Lord, what are they doing when we are not following our Rabb's guidance? We are following our own whims. And that's idle talk, because they take us away from Sabilillah, from the path of God, or the path leading to God. So here, Lahwa al-Hadith refers to anything that distracts us from the path leading to God, anything that distracts us from remembering our ubudiyah and the hereafter. And so if it is so, think about it. How much of our life is not Lahwa al-Hadith? This is a question to all of us. If Lahwa al-Hadith refers to anything that distracts us from the path leading to God, meaning anything, it distracts us from anything that reminds us of our ubudiyah, of the hereafter. So how much, accordingly, how much of our life is actually, or how often are we busy with Lahwa al-Hadith? How much of what we grew up with is Lahwa al-Hadith? Anything that does not remind us of God, of our ubudiyah, of rububiyah, of seeking the face of God, on seeing the face of God in everything, of the hereafter, of how this life is perishing and transient and impermanent, is actually Lahu al-Hadith, in a sense. And I think this is a very important point, because if we read this sixth verse of Surat Luqman as referring to those people only, then those people exist. But if we are not careful, we will be though, because here it says they, what do they do? وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهُ الْحَدِيثِ. There are people who purchase idle talk to mislead from the path of God. Then we will be easily misled. If there are people like this, then we have to be careful. And so, if we stop and look at our life, how much of it is Lahu al-Hadith, you will be really surprised. A lot of it is Lahu al-Hadith. And I'm not talking about like mundane things like eating or something, because there is no such a separation in the Quran. Eating, drinking, sleeping, all these things are blessings. All these things can be means of remembering God and knowing Him with all His names as the Razzaq, as the provider, as the generous, as the helper, as the Rabb, as the sustainer and caretaker. And so they are all means actually of worshipping God. and being grateful to him. So I'm not talking about that. It could be the same thing, but we never learned how to interact with our life in a way that we see the face of God. So we don't make the means to remember God. Or it could be also all kinds of ideas and views and beliefs about life, and about what success is, what our life purpose is, things that we never question, we take for granted, but actually don't help us in our life as far as the hereafter is concerned, but it can be also a big obstacle because we give it a priority to other things, to the teaching of the Quran, for instance. So any path that deviates from the path of God is misguided, and hence it leads away from prosperity and joy, because that's what we claim we are after. When we're seeking success, worldly success and career and all these things, we tell ourselves that's what we want, prosperity and joy. But we were told just before that it is the muhsin, for the muhsinun, أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون. So it is the muhsins who are on the guidance of their Rabb, who follow the guidance of their Rabb. Those are the prosperous one, the fortunate one. There is no prosperity and joy without the aspect that looks to eternity. Anything that doesn't look to eternity will lead us to suffering in this life, because if we actually stop and think about it, it's meaningless to live a life that will end with death. Why should we strive and work so hard? Or why should people be good if there is nothing afterwards? It is the essence of human beings to be good. That's why, alhamdulillah, even when people do not live with the awareness of the hereafter, the majority of people are still good. But can you imagine if we add to that the awareness of the hereafter, how much more goodness there will be? Because life will be much more meaningful. Without the hereafter, without eternity, living a life that is doomed to end with our death, which actually can happen anytime, makes everything meaningless, purposeless, no purpose. And for the human heart, for the human soul that long for lasting purpose, for lasting beauty, for lasting friendship, for lasting of whatever we value and appreciate, that's kind of hell. That's the suffering. So it's the suffering in this life and in the next, because in the next actually it's worse, because in the next life the suffering will be, the reality is clear and there is no way to block it or veil it or distract ourselves from it. So we will have to confront it. Here, when it's because it's painful, we distract ourselves even more and more and more. And so how do we protect ourselves from the harm of these unconscious people, or this unconsciousness in ourselves being responsive to what's going out in the world? Because these people, they are out there and they can only harm us if we are open to what they are, how do you say, sending around, propagating, what they are selling to us. So how do we protect ourselves? by following the guidance and the wisdom of the Quran. As we told in another verse in Al-Jathiyah, which is chapter 45, it says ثم جعلناك على شريعة من الأمر فاتبعها ولا تتبع أهواء الذين لا يعلمون. And we have set you on a clear way, which means a way of a purposeful way, the way that fulfills the purpose of your creation. So follow this way. On a clear way, min al-amri, on a clear way of our commandment. So follow this way and follow not the whims of those who do not know. They don't know the truth, they don't know wisdom, they don't know anything, they don't know the reality of this world and the next, and even less of the next. So don't follow their whims. And when do we follow their whims? When we are following our whims. It's only when we are following our whims that we are more susceptible of being misguided by others or led by others or manipulated by others, whether knowingly or unknowingly, whether the others know of it or not. Especially like now, something it's written, it's published, it's on the internet, it's anywhere, it's in the street, and it's up to us. We pick and choose, and we pick and choose according to our intention. And that's why intention is very important, and we can only intend when we are conscious and aware. And that's why ghafla is condemned in the Quran, because when we are in a state of ghafla, we can do anything and follow anything, and we're not even aware of it. Astaghfirullah. So here, the point here, the pragmatic lesson is, when we follow our whims, we cannot at the same time be following the divine guidance. So that gives us a clue now. Because when we live our life at the level of nafs al-ammara bisu, the evil commanding souls, that we identify with our desires, with our appetites, with our fears, with our anger. I don't view myself as I am going through a stage of anger. I say I am angry, I am this. I identify. It becomes me. I don't have a sense of me, a part of that. And so I become subjugated to those desires and fears and anger. And at this level of awareness, it's a very low level, let's say level of heedlessness actually, we believe that we are our wants. So let's say our wants and impulses and whims and desires constitutes who we are. And so we strive to fulfill our whims and desires, regardless of our purpose in life, because we are unaware of our purpose in life. We're unaware of truly who we are as Abdullah, as those Khalifatullah, the vicegerent of God on earth, who were created for the special purpose of knowing the Rabb, who God himself breathed of his own spirit into them. When we are unaware of who we are, and we can only identify with nafs al-ammara bisu, with our desires and fears and anger, when we like small kids is okay, that they're still growing, but like as adults, still being like a small kid, then life becomes very difficult, and we try to entertain ourselves to alleviate the suffering and the pain of the meaninglessness and the purposelessness and the fears and the anger and the dissatisfaction of the human heart that longs for meaning and purpose and eternity. So at this level of being, this nafs, the evil commanding nafs, rules over us. It dominates our sense of self, of identity, and it commands us, and we execute its commands. And we are not Abdullah. We become servant to our whims and impulses. So this gives us a hint. If it is difficult to follow the guidance, then we have to stop and pause and reflect on what we are doing. So following divine guidance requires a higher level of awareness. That high level of awareness, yes, it is something that we cultivate, but the seed is intentional choice. Each time I make a small step, intentional choice, as it says in the Qudsi hadith, if you make one step towards me, I'll come running towards you. This is our compassionate Rabb saying this in this sacred hadith. And so if each time we make that intention and we choose divine guidance over our whims and impulses, then it becomes easier and easier to follow the divine guidance, and it becomes clearer and clearer to us that we will be more and more aware of our whims. And we can take the example of last monthly teleconference on the 5 daily prayers. If we intend to follow the guidance, the divine guidance, the guidance of the Quran, and implement it in our lives, then when something happens, because this is very important, because if we don't make this choice, the alternative is when we don't choose divine guidance, when we don't choose to be servants of God, and when we are servant of God, as we've seen earlier in some teleconferences, we realize that everything is given to our service. When we are not following divine guidance, we end up being the slaves and servants of our whims and wants and impulses. And in that state of mindlessness, we will follow lahu al-hadith. When we are not following wisdom and guidance, we are following idle stories and talk without even being aware of it. That's the point of being in ghafla, not being aware. And that's why we repeatedly ask for help and guidance to remain on the straight path during the 5 daily prayers. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ اهْدِنَا الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمُ. We ask God for help. We worship Him and we ask Him for help. We ask Him to keep us on the straight path. So practically, we make the intention to follow divine guidance. And we make the intention to stop following our impulses and whims blindly. So it does not mean that we will have no impulses and no whims overnight. They will still come. But when they come, instead of just obeying blindly, we'll stop and question those desires. What is it that lies behind them? And in the case of the Salah, the 5 daily prayers, in the last monthly teleconference, Isra gave us the example of that inner impulse that whispers to us that prayer may be good, but 5 times is too much, and so on and so forth. So instead of just following it blindly and start leaving the prayer and being lazier and lazier, what Isra taught us was to pause and listen to this whispering and weigh it and analyze it and question it. And when you question it, it falls apart. It falls apart because it's assuming that this life is everything. Whereas when you stop and think about it, of course, 5 times a day is not too much at all, because it's an investment towards eternal life, and everything, all the rest of the day, mostly is investment for things that will perish sometimes on the same day. Like, yes, we need food, but like sometimes we spend so much time on very sophisticated food. If it were just for the feeding the body, we could eat something, spending less time. For instance, I'm not making judgment about it. I'm just saying that we don't question that sometimes, but we question, for instance, a prayer. But when we stop, instead of just following it blindly, when we stop and listen actually to the whispering and actually reflect on it, then if our intention is pure, if we purify our intention and we're clear about akhirah, if we work on that yaqeen, then, like in the case of that Isra talked about, the answer to that whispering actually increases our appreciation for the benefits of Salat, and it expands our wisdom, and it strengthens our iman, and it renews our yaqeen in akhirah. So if or when we make the intention to follow divine guidance and the intention to stop following our whims and impulses, then when the impulse or the desire or want comes, we just don't act on it. We stop and listen and question. Is it good or not? Does it help akhirah or not? Is it something that leads me closer to God? Where is the face of God in this? So that
and also to add to the questioning, Sister Yamina, also to question, is this making sense? Because
yes,
for example, in the case of prayer, I'm tired of praying, assuming that I'm here for a long time and I will keep praying and praying. What is the assumption that I'll be around for a long time? This might be my last prayer, literally, and it's not an exaggeration. In imagination, we think we are here forever. Another imagination is to think that we are here with no purpose. I'm just here to meet my immediate needs and have instant pleasure. That's an assumption of our ego. And so when you pray, you're kind of delaying some of the instant pleasure. Wait a second, am I here just for the instant pleasure? How about the pleasure of enjoying God's blessings in God's name and realizing that I'm a guest of God in this world? How about that higher level of spiritual awareness? That's my real purpose here.
Which gives
so
you,
once you question those assumptions,
which gives you that higher spiritual awareness, gives you pleasure here and forever. And the assumption that you just mentioned, Isra, are lahu al-hadith. Those are the assumption that makes us susceptible to lahu al-hadith. And so listen, rather than acting on those whims, if we stop and ask the questions, and we are taught how to question in the Quran, then we learn from it. So, and I think a very good example, and thank you for the comment, Isra, and I think a good example of how to learn from those whispering, those impulses, is to go back and listen to the our last monthly teleconference with Isra about the 5 daily prayers. That's a very good example of someone who has a muhsin with the intention to follow divine guidance receives this impulse, this whim, this whisper that is based on false assumptions, on idle assumptions, and turns it around, and it becomes, subhanallah, an opportunity to expand our wisdom and strengthen our iman, and strengthen our appreciation, increase our appreciation for the benefits of the 5 daily prayers of the Salat, alhamdulillah. So this is something very practical to do. Instead of just following the whim, stop and listen to it and question it. To do this, we need to intend that. That's why we need to keep renewing our intention. And that's why when we pray the 5 daily prayers, we have to make it an opportunity to renew our awareness. So we don't just repeat the words, but we actually ask God for help. When we say إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين, we just don't say the word, we actually mean them. Inshallah.
And if I may add,
Sure.
you know, these days are considered to be a very sacred season, according to prophetic sayings, leading up to the Eid. And today I was reading something that said, you know, it's very, very good to, in these days, to glorify God, which means you should say Allahu Akbar. And when you said, you know, we shouldn't just say it, we just actually should mean it. These days, also, this is essential that when we read that it's very important to offer gratitude, it's not just saying Alhamdulillah, it's not just saying Allahu Akbar, it's not just repeating the word, but intending to actually mean it, that Alhamdulillah is a genuine gratitude, a genuine response to the world, that we find ourselves in a world that we didn't create, nor did we choose to be here, and somebody chose to bring us into existence out of nothing. And the gratitude, the depth of gratitude, is expressed in that Alhamdulillah. It's not just repeating the words because there's blessing in repeating the phrases. It's more, the phrases are, you know,
the reminders,
because of that intention, because of that remembrance, inshallah.
The phrase, the expression, the words themselves, they are blessed because they are themselves the seeds, the reminders that will bear the fruit to the extent of our awareness and intention, inshallah.
And Dr. Yamina, it's also the days for tadabbur, because if we do tadabbur, it adds extra dimension to that Dr. Isra likes to mention, you know, just saying lip service, besides lip service, if your heart gets involved as well, and if we do tadabbur, why we are saying Allahu Akbar and all those, you know, that will add an extra dimension to the speaker.
Yes, inshallah. That's what we come together to reflect on the meaning of the Quran, because if those words are reminders, but if there is nothing that I remember, if I don't know anything, if I don't know what they mean, I cannot remember what they are supposed to remind me. So yes, inshallah, tafakkur and tadabbur, inshallah. So when we follow divine guidance this way, then bi'idhnillah, inshallah, our basir, our insight opens up, and we attain that certainty, that yaqeen. It's like we cultivate more and more that yaqeen. So not only we can tell the truth from falsehood, we can, and the good and wise from the frivolous and the idle, but also we will find in ourselves that courage to choose ahsan al-hadith, to choose divine guidance and wisdom over lahu al-hadith, because it's not always easy. Sometimes, because when the majority are following lahu al-hadith, it seems like you're being too zealous sometimes. So that courage will come when we have the strength of that yaqeen of akhirah. وَهُمْ بِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. And the next ayah, so we had, there are people who purchase baseless or idle talk to mislead from the path of God without knowledge, and they ridicule the path. Those will have a humiliating retribution. And whenever our signs, our ayat, are conveyed unto him, he turns away in his arrogance as if he had not heard them. He had not heard the ayat, as if there were a deafness in his ears. Give him then the tidings of a grievous, of a painful suffering. So here, generally speaking, whoever does not surrender to God and does not follow his guidance is to some degree or another, depending on one's intention, arrogant in his self-delusion. This is the self-delusion that he doesn't need his maker's guidance. The self-delusion of not being aware of how needy we are and how our needs are being taken care of. How there will be no me, no I, no Yamina, no living Yamina if my breathing is not sustained for a few minutes, and I cannot do anything about it. When we are not following divine guidance, to different degrees, depending on people's intention, there is a certain amount of arrogance. There is a certain self-delusion going on there when we forget. Because if I'm truly aware of my needs, I wouldn't forget. Do we forget to breathe? Do we forget to drink water? But we forget. We say we forget about following divine guidance. How come? Because we don't renew our intention to follow it. Why don't we renew it? Because somehow part of me is still self-deluded. There is still that arrogance that, like, I don't need my Rabb's guidance in everything all the time, 24/7. And there is also that self-delusion that we know how to live our life. We have our own assumptions, as Isra had mentioned. We have so many imaginary assumptions that we never question, that actually are baseless and idle and don't make sense, because they're all based on this life, taking it for granted as though it will last forever and never questioning its transience. And so we think we know how to enjoy our life, we know what success is, we know what prosperity is, and we have plans to achieve it. Astaghfirullah. And so whenever we're not heeding the divine message, we're not listening to the divine message, we're not following its guidance, what we're actually doing is turning a deaf ear to it. It could be momentarily, temporarily, but for when we're not doing one, we are doing the other. And unless we purify our intention, we constantly renew that intention. We need to purify it, so we clear that this is what we want, we make our istighfar, and then we cultivate that intention, inshallah. So unless we make istighfar and intend, then whenever we're reminded, we may end up, God forbid, like people who have no interest in the divine message. And I'm talking about Muslim people, and maybe you know people around you, who get almost like annoyed when they are reminded. And I've seen many times people say, we know, we already believe, like what's the point in repeating the same things again and again? We know God is one, there is akhirah, okay. And they are busy with the world all the time, and they see no problem in listening to the same, we see no problem in listening to the same depressing news, for instance, again and again. I don't know, but like if you don't listen all the time to the news, from time to time when I happen to listen to it, to me it seems like it's the same thing. They all look the same. Or like you see people who like, for instance, who are football addicts. It seems like for someone who is an outsider, it seems like the same thing. But for the person who loves that, they watch it again and again. I mean, different matches, but again, it's the same. And you see people like, they watch it, they watch the game, and then they talk about it. And with lots of love and enthusiasm. But when you talk about the Quran, about our Rabb, about being grateful, about remembering, I say, we know that. Like, why do you keep talking about it again and again? And that reminds us again that not denying God is not the same as believing in God. Sometimes we just don't deny and we think we believe. How can we believe in a God we don't know? We need to, if we're believers in God, then we seek His knowledge, we seek to know Him. And the more we know Him, the more we will fall in love with His compassion, with His generosity, with all the beautiful names, with His beauty, alhamdulillah. So I'll stop here, inshallah. And next week, inshallah, we'll continue with Ayah 8, and we will be back to the situation of the believers, inshallah. It's about إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتُ النَّعِيمِ. For those who believe and work righteous deeds, there will be gardens of bliss. So again, the topic is back to the believers, because from the beginning, this is a speech, a guidance to guide us to being muhsin, to guide us to being those who work righteous deeds and end up in gardens of bliss, inshallah. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين. نستغفر الله نستغفر الله نستغفر الله العظيم الكريم الرحيم الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ونتوب إليه سبحانه آمين. اللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات ولهم جنات النعيم.
Ameen. Ameen. Jazakallah khair. Is there anyone who wants to ask any question or offer a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to, I forgot to mention in verse number 4, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Al-Ladina yuqimuna salata wa yutuna zakata wa hum bil akhirati hum yuqinun. I just wanted to comment on it that two out of these three things, two are actions and one is the I mean
it's a state of being,
but
yes.
It's a belief, right? The akhirat, the certainty
Yes.
is a belief, and two is action, and they are all related to each other, I guess. Yes. I mean, once you do action, then you get more hidayah, and more hidayah leads to Rahmah and the third.
Actually, sister, when we talked about this, we mentioned that actually it is those who establish worship, the salah, yuqimuna salah, and yu'tuna zakah, and they pay the zakah because they are certain of the hereafter. The wow there is because. So why do they establish the salah in this way? and they give in the form of zakat, we said it was because of their certainty in the hereafter. And that's why the certainty in the hereafter is very, very important. It's here that state of certainty that will transform how we interact with the world, how we see the world, and therefore all our priorities in the world will change because of that certainty.
So, but then the question arises, why is it in the end? Because it should be in the first. I mean, I'm assuming that all the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any ayah are theoretically sequenced. Like, you're human. First comes up, then comes first you take care of yourself, then the other people's zakat, and then you come to the stage of certainty. I thought, if this was number one, then how come this is in the last?
But it doesn't mean it's last. We have to look at the meaning of the world, of the words. What we see from outside is people who establish constant prayer and who give in the name of God in the form of zakat, of tazkiyah. And we wonder, how can they do this so easily, so beautifully, these muhsins?
Yes.
And it's telling us, you know why? Because hum bil akhirati hum yuqinun, because they have certainty of the hereafter.
How do you get the certainty?
Sorry?
I mean, how do we get to that level of certainty?
Bil akhirah, we will see. It will come. It was there in other chapters of the Quran, and it will come here as well, because after belief in God, the most important pillar of belief that is repeated in the Quran is belief in Akhirah. Not only belief, although the Quran also uses belief, but also yaqeen is used mostly. Yaqeen, certainty, like no doubt. And why? Because look at no doubt that this world is passing. And I gave the example of a clock. Actually, it's not my example. It's Sheikh Bedior Zaman Said Nursi gives this example. He says, if you look at the clock, do you have to wait for an hour to pass to know that it's working? No, we just look at the seconds. The needle for the seconds is moving. That's it. I am sure that this clock works. So look at the hours and the days. They are moving. It means that the centuries and the millenniums and everything is also moving. The clock of this world is working. And if it's working, it will end, and that in itself is a sign. Of course, we talked more about it when we had a teleconference about the life to come and akhirah. But inshallah, yes, this is a good question. We'll keep this in mind when we find.
But there's a big difference between believing and yaqeen, because most of the time I'm talking about myself. I believe, but the way I act is not like yaqeen, I mean, that's a different dimension. I thought that was given by Allah.
That's right. The different dimension is, I'm so sure it's the fact. It is a fact for me. So I make all my choices in life accordingly. That's why it is so important. That's why the prayer becomes like a qibla, let's say, like a main activity that life revolves around it rather than the other way around. We don't live our life and make some room for salat. No, because our life becomes ibadah and ubudiyah. So the salat becomes what it revolves around. It becomes what reminds us of the purpose of our life again and again. So it becomes very, very important. The Salatu Imaduddin. Yeah, inshallah, the more we read, let's keep this in mind and go back to yaqeen in akhirah, because it's such a key belief here, a key concept, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. And is there anyone else who wants to share a comment or ask a question?
Today I saw my acupuncturist, and he knows my mother. So he asked how she was and what she was doing. So I mentioned that she's teaching in the university over there. And he said that, oh, those universities, they're really famous for basketball matches. And I mentioned, she's not interested in watching sports games. So he said that, well, she should still go, because not only it is an enthusiastic experience, but then she will have something to talk to her students with and connect over. So it was interesting that this conversation happened this morning, and then at the end of the halakha, it was as if it's an answer to that.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah. And if we are sharing anecdotes, if I may share one, when Sister Yamina was talking about ideal talk and how it's baseless and distracting us from truth, I remembered, again, I don't know if everyone would connect with this, but there was this cooking show, how they make competitions. So like a couple people come and they say, I'm going to win and I'm going to do my best. And then they have a little spiel, and then they're going to go ahead and, compete in cooking situation. So this lady said she's very passionate about cooking, this and that. And then she said, I'm doing this for my dad, who taught me cooking and who passed away recently or at some point. And her eyes watered up. And she said, I'm doing it for my dad. And to me, for that moment, of course, I'm not judging her, or I don't know her intention. But to me, at that moment, I felt very empty, because I said, if you are sad about your father's death, which is a very human thing, that is, fine into bothering your human heart. You had a connection, now he's not there. The one who taught you your passion, he's not there. And that's very painful for human heart. This is an invitation to go beyond this world. And this is an invitation to seek the eternal. And even if you won in this cooking race, or if you became the best chef in the entire world, still it's not going to make up for that need for connection to infinite, and to find the one who gave you your father and who gave you this yearning, almost this protest against separation, the one who gave you this. If you don't find it, even if you are the champion of entire cooking in the world, it's not going to help. And that when Sister Yamina was talking about the purchase of idle talk, that example came to me, that what we are putting our energy in and what we're purchasing in response is actually not something going to help us, and it actually is worse because it's distracting us. So I mean, that's also my small example here.
But for the one who is looking at the same thing, it can be a reminder. So the same event can be a pray that feeling, that desire that she has, inshallah, is actually a message from her Rabb, and inshallah she will heed the message instead of distracting herself from it, inshallah. And may we all heed the message instead of getting distracted.
Inshallah. Yes. So with that, we will close tonight's session. Jazakumullah khair, Sister Yamina, and Jazakumullah khair, all of you. And may Allah make us really follow the guidance and find our paths and follow our paths to Him.
آمين إن شاء الله.
السلام عليكم.
Thank you. وعليكم السلام.
السلام عليكم everyone. جزاكم الله خير.
وإياكم. Sister Amina, I want to ask you a question. I just stopped recording.